Yeah, Facebook won't like your sermon. They will drain your battery somehow. Suddenly. Yeah. That was a bit much. I can't listen much more of that kid. What's your solution, doctor? I'll let you do
mixing form and function, stone and steel. They shape the face of America's most diverse city.
Moses.
Now, New York bridges on modern marbles.
Let's get to the truth. Quick to believe lies. Damn railway folks ain't get good doing nothing but destruction.
A living history lesson ties together the islands of New York City. Each bridge has a unique story to tell. From the East River to the Hudson, beneath the steel and stone, are tales of genius, courage, greed, and death. Our first story begins with a sea of humanity blanketing the Verrazano Narrows Bridge at the start of the New York City Marathon. Spanning New York's harbor, the bridge, built between 1959 and 1964, has represented a way out for the residents of Staten Island. For until 1964, Staten Island's only connections to New York City were the ferries that crossed between Staten Island, Brooklyn, and the island of Manhattan. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge gave the rural and isolated islanders their first land link to Brooklyn, but it was a mixed blessing. Overnight, Staten Island crawled with displaced Brooklynites looking for an affordable place to live.
There was a massive outmigration of not just middle class, but working class people. And that's what the Verrazano Bridge did. It allowed the Italian working class and lower middle class of Brooklyn an escape route to the suburbs. That escape route was the Verrazano Bridge.
Projects waiting for black folks.
A migration triggered by the chairman of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, the politically powerful Robert Moses, builder of the 1964 World's Fair, Lincoln Center, and Shea Stadium. To create room for the Verrazano's substantial approach roads, Moses ousted 8,000 Brooklyn inhabitants from their homes.
In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, as roads were being built in New York, and we were building it before there was federal aid for roads, Bob Moses had the power of eminent domain as the city's construction coordinator. He can decide that it was in the public interest to take your house, to take your property. And there's very little that you could do other than go through the political process. He would have design drawings and engineers come out, and then you would have to move.
But nobody would think of bucking City Hall or Robert Moses.
Nor did anyone buck Moses when he nixed rapid transit, forcing everyone to travel the Verrazano by car.
You needed a car, which said you were from some kind of an economic class. So in many ways it polarized the city. And so designing a bridge the wrong way to not introduce transit created one community that was more affluent and more white, and that was the community of Staten Island, and it left Brooklyn to be more minority, a poorer community.
As he'd done before with his bridges, Robert Moses hired the now elderly master bridge builder Othmar Ammann. Critics charge that Ammann may have designed the bridge, but he designed Robert Moses' bridge. Costs spiraled quickly. At completion, the Verrazano cost over $320 million. Workers spent a year building the Verrazano's two towers. Built perpendicular to the Earth's surface, they are 1 5/8 inches farther apart at their tops than at their bases, due to the curvature of the Earth. 690-foot tall towers are higher than most of Manhattan's skyscrapers. From anchorage to anchorage, the structure extends 6,690 feet. The fantastic Verrazano flaunts a 4,260-foot center span and double-decked 6-lane roadway. Ammann said the bridge was conceived as an enormous object drawn as faintly as possible. Ed Fennell's father worked on the cables.
The younger, more crazy ironworkers would take their American bridge hardhat, was like a bowl, and the cable was getting weaved like this, the main cable, and they would sit in their hard hat, slide down the cable to get the lunch.
It took 6 months for the crew to spin the 4 main cables that support the roadway, testing each wire for size, strength, and metallic content. Then the cables were carried from anchorage to anchorage on a wheel that laid them side by side and one above the other.
It's called the eternal wheel, and it was hung on a cable over where the main cable would lay, and it just ran 24 hours a day in the Verrazano Bridge.
In a suspension design, the parallel cables are the main support member. The cables are strung over towers that run the length of the bridge and are anchored at each end.
These are huge blocks, heavy blocks, and their purpose is to hold the cable, to resist the cable. And then you have the cable goes to the other end, to the other anchorage. And it's anchored in the anchorage. Typically, the cables would splay out into bands of wires, groups of wires that would wrap around I-bars, steel beams that are then embedded in the cable, in the anchorage, and they're embedded further and further, and then you get to the very base of the anchorage, and there's a plate that's attached to a plate. Now, on top of that plate is masonry and a very heavy block that resists that pull. So you've got the cable wanting to be pulled this way, and it's trying to lift this block up, and that's what holds it.
Suspenders hung from the main cables support the deck. It was the longest suspension bridge in the world and held that record until 1981. Named for the 16th century Italian explorer who discovered New York Harbor, the Verrazano Narrows was dedicated on November 21st, 1964. When it came time to present Othmar Ammann, Robert Moses introduced the 85-year-old as the greatest living bridge engineer, perhaps the greatest of all time. Although Ammann is credited with many bridges, the Verrazano Narrows was his consummate achievement. Coming up, a medieval symbol of New York City. The Verrazano Narrows broke San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge span record by 60 feet. New York bridges will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to New York bridges on Modern Marvels. East of Liberty Island, joining the island of Manhattan to Brooklyn, is the Brooklyn Bridge. After 13 years of construction, in the spring of 1883, New Yorkers marveled at their new bridge, framed against a sky brilliant with fireworks. Spanning the East River with its neo-Gothic towers and dense network of cables, the Brooklyn Bridge was the largest suspension bridge in the world. So impressive, New Yorkers compared it to the pyramids, and it hadn't opened for carriage traffic a minute too soon.
Manhattan had been practically nothing in 1800. By 1875, there were 1 million people on Manhattan Island. By 1910, there were going to be 2 million people, and they could see it coming, and they were desperate for space.
An East River Bridge could solve overcrowding on the island's Lower East Side and spur development of Brooklyn as well. A joint venture, it was originally called the New York and Brooklyn Bridge. After the city's consolidation in 1898, the New York name was dropped.
The Brooklyn Bridge cost an enormous amount of money to build at the time that it was constructed. It required the resources of a much larger city than just New York, the island of Manhattan at the time, or the city of Brooklyn at the time, and the two of them had to come together.
Before the Brooklyn Bridge, the only way to cross the unpredictable East River was by ferry.
And we may think they're romantic today because we don't have to depend on them. But believe me, when that was the only way you could cross the river, you hated them.
In 1865, over 41 million people crossed the East River by ferry, sandwiched on boats moving between Brooklyn and Manhattan. East River passengers were as likely to lose their lives as make their destination. One miserable commuter was legendary engineer John Augustus Roebling. Roebling pushed for a suspension bridge over the East River. As a famous bridge designer and owner of a wire rope company, Roebling wanted to build the bridge himself. His proposal was met with mixed reaction due to the fact that many of the turn-of-the-century bridges collapsed.
Along comes Roebling with a design for an almost 1,600-foot span, unthought of, unheard of. This is the moonshot of the mid-19th century.
What basically made the Brooklyn Bridge possible were improvements in wire technology. Much in the same way that improvements in elevator technology made it possible to build the skyscraper, they were able to come up with a wire that was strong enough to bridge the East River without snapping.
John Augustus Roebling's wire rope cable was the breakthrough in modern suspension bridge technology. In 1869, the same year the bridge's plan was approved, John Roebling died of tetanus. He would never see his cobweb of cables reach to the sky. The entire construction of the Brooklyn Bridge fell to his 32-year-old son, Washington. 1 year later, Washington Roebling ordered pneumatic caissons floated onto the East River and sunk into the riverbed. Inside these wooden subterranean chambers, immigrant labor paid $2.25 a day, mined for bedrock. They needed a firm foundation for the bridge's towers, which would stand in the river.
They would begin to put successive amounts of stone on top of the caissons, and this weight would push the caisson down.
Compressed air was pumped into the caissons to keep them from sinking into the mud. As the depth increased, so did the air pressure.
Then they would send the workers in there with shovels and picks and so forth, and they would literally start excavating all of the material that's in the caisson.
Workers entering and leaving through an airlock experienced excruciating pain. The changes in air pressure of the caissons proved deadly. Caissons disease, also known as the bends, killed 3 men and paralyzed others, including Washington Roebling.
They thought it had something to do with poor oxygen quality in the caissons. They thought that the men were in too cramped conditions. They even looked at the mud to make sure that there wasn't some kind of gaseous exhalation that the mud was giving off when they were doing the excavation work within the caissons.
Permanently unable to walk or talk from the crippling bends, Washington Roebling became known as the man in the window. He supervised the bridge from his townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, using Emily, his wife, as an intermediary.
It was dangerous, but it was work. And this was important to the immigrants. Now they were paid very little. They went on strike, and actually I believe the strike was broken.
To the immigrants.
Because after all, the bridge workers could always go out there and scoop up another bunch of immigrants.
Digging through the riverbed of loose mud, silt, and stones, the Brooklyn Foundation hit bedrock at 44 feet. The foundation on the Manhattan end rested on sand. A geologist as well as an engineer, Washington Roebling learned from his borings that in Manhattan, bedrock was about 175 feet below the riverbed.
Bedrock.
He'd reached about 78 feet. Roebling would not risk more money. So, after an analysis of the stratum from his boring, he determined that if the particular layer that the tower would be sitting on, which was compressed silt, had not moved in the past 100 million years, most likely it would never move. Roebling put an end to the excavation, finished construction of the towers, and began to lay the cables that held up the framework of the bridge.
A rope, a very thin line, would be shot across the East River, or hauled across the East River. And attached to this piece of rope was the first strand of wire, some of which is actually thinner in diameter than a human hair. And they would painstakingly pull the first of the wire strands across, hang them over the top of the towers, and affix them to the anchorages that sit on either end of the bridge and anchor the cables to the earth.
The cable was made up of a large number of individual wires which were parallel to one another. Neither the cables nor the wires were twisted in any way. Suspended from a board seat with ropes at its corners, men traveled between the towers on pulleys.
And then when they had a bundle of a couple of thousand or a few thousand of those strands, they would have a machine that came along that was like a large spinner, and it would basically pull the strands together and it would bind them.
They'd repeat the process until they had over a dozen bundles of wire. Then they would be bound into one large cable, which are the main cables seen on the bridge today.
It was the longest.
Similar to thread from a sheep being spun to embroider. It's the same damn thing. You know they got plenty of, you call it paper cuts. Oh, let's get back to Mr. Black, Professor Black. What he's talking about. Oh yeah, same thing he's always talking about. Got a little one track mind. A one track mind seems to have no solutions, just analyzes problems all day long. That's what I call men, Homo sapiens, from the masculine point, with no view, and the dicks, and wanna be dicks. Okay, so there's two different ones. Must have been finished. Alright, I pushed the wrong button. This one. Skip the long hellos. Skip the hypothetical we see. Skip the bullshit. You didn't hear from me.
On Facebook, Exotic Mixes and my girl Kiki Shaw. I think she's on the ground. She's definitely on Facebook. Exotic Naturals. That's what she had to make for me, because I ain't drinking nothing. Or some fruit juice or something. Some water. Alright? So we gotta support those two businesses, those two companies, independent people doing definitely some independent things. Alright? Started now, y'all wait for this thing to start. I'm trying to get it started. But anyway, I'm trying to get on Facebook, Facebook Live. Alright? In the meantime, between time, let me drop some of these ads for y'all. This weekend, the whole entire weekend, I'm going to be in the DMV area. Alright? Sunday, August 19th, I'm going to be in Capitol Heights at Everlasting Light. Capitol Heights at Everlasting, like 9185 Central Avenue, Capitol Heights, Maryland. Alright? Me and my man Red Pill. We're doing the Enemy Decoded, preparation for victory. Enemy Decoded. It starts at 3 o'clock. If you're in the DMV area, come check me out. Alright, my phone number is 678-557-2919. 678-557-2919. Or if you want to vend, you want to set up a table, sell whatever you need to sell, get your food, your hustle on, call the brother Jabari. Alright, 410-303-4120. 410-303-4120. Alright. A couple more announcements I gotta make so we get the business out of the way so we can move on. So that's Sunday, but Saturday I'm gonna be in Baltimore, as y'all say in Baltimore. I'm gonna be in B-More. Me and Red Pill also, we're doing Fear of Black Planet Part 2. Alright, media, music, and the manipulation of the black mind. That starts at 7 o'clock. Alright. The phone number to van and get tickets is 410-303-4120. The location is Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, 430 East Belvedere Avenue. 430 East Belvedere Avenue in Baltimore. All right, Fear of a Black Planet, Professor Griff, and Red Pill. All right, that both the events are brought to you by Reality Speaks of Soul Viva's Nation. All right, Saturday, August 18th, and Sunday, August 19th in the DMV area. Baltimore and then Capitol Heights. All right, and of course, you can't go nowhere without getting the entire body working. So we got to do the full. Pardon me. We got to take our olive leaf extract, antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. MyOliveLeaf.biz. Go to MyOliveLeaf.biz. The phone number is 612-567-3263. It deals with high blood pressure, diabetes, sugar, diabetic blood sugar, kidney disease, lupus, eczema, STDs, you name it. Olive leaf extract. All right. Go check it out. All right. And of course, I'll be first weekend in October. I'll be in Philly at the LOX conference. I'll be at the LOX conference, the 24th annual LOX conference in Philly. We deal with images in the media, so we're going to talk about seductive manipulation of consciousness. All right, that's October 7th. Go online and look up the LOX conference. All right, I will be there August 7th at 3:30 speaking. All right, life and relationship coaching with a passion to support women on their journey to healthy self-esteem. The Courageous Coaching, Sophia and Tom. All right, coaching women from timid to tough. Give her a call at 786-955-3930. 786-955-3930. Check her out on the gram and Periscope at courageous_coach. Alright? I'm going to put all these images up so y'all can see it. Alright, last one. And this is probably one of the most